This story begins not long before my husband's face turned deathly pale as he shouted, "I'm ruined. My name is Riley Lawson. Out in the corporate world, I am the Vice President of Operations at Heartland Provisions, a major food distribution company. But inside my husband's family, I was just a daughter-in-law who had to know her place, mind her manners, and speak with absolute deference. My title might sound impressive, but my actual job was acting as a shock absorber for every crisis. If the temperature in a cold storage warehouse fluctuated by a few degrees, if an order was late, or if a delivery truck got stuck in gridlock on the BQE, the whole system would descend into chaos. I was used to midnight phone calls, the smell of fresh printer ink on logistics manifests, and taking Zoom meetings standing up in the middle of a loading dock. At the office, people called me Ms. Lawson, the operations powerhouse. But the moment I stepped into my apartment, I had to remind myself to think 3 times before speaking a single word. I had been married for 4 years and 2 months. My husband, Blake Sterling, was the CEO of Heartland Provisions. In public, he was impeccably polished. His tailored suits were always wrinkle-free, and a single charming smile from him was enough to make business partners nod in agreement. Outsiders often told me I was lucky, but only those inside the marriage knew that sometimes, even under the thickest down comforter, it felt freezing cold. Our marriage might have looked radiant from the outside, but inside it was often pitch black. We lived in a luxury penthouse in Midtown Manhattan. Even though we didn't live with my mother-in-law, Catherine, it felt no different. She lived in a massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, but kept a pied-à-terre just 10 minutes away from us. She often said, "I don't like to intrude." Yet whenever she felt like it, she would show up unannounced. She would walk into our apartment as if she owned the place, head straight to the custom kitchen, open the Sub-Zero fridge, inspect the espresso machine, glance at the recycling bin, and then ask, "What are you two eating?" At first, I tried to keep my cool, thinking it was her way of caring. But over time, I realized her care was like a measuring tape. Everything was judged by a standard, her standard. If I ate bland food, she said, Blake wouldn't like a boring wife. If I ate salty food, she reminded me that women needed to watch their figures. I left for work early. She said a workaholic wife would neglect her husband. I came home late. She warned that the city was full of temptations for women. Her words were never outright vulgar, but every sentence was laced with passive-aggressive digs at my dignity as a daughter-in-law. It was as if I was always on the verge of committing a fatal error. My sister-in-law, Serena, was 4 years younger than me. She visited often. Her mouth was as sweet as sugar, but her words constantly put me in difficult positions. In front of me, Serena would smile sympathetically. "I feel so bad for you, Riley. You look exhausted." But the moment she turned to her mother, she would whisper, "Mom, doesn't Riley look gaunt lately? She must be stressed. A man gets tired of coming home to a tense wife, you know." And I just stayed quiet. I understood that in this family, even a half-joking sentence could detonate into a massive issue. That month, a late summer heat wave hit New York. In the mornings when I opened the windows, the air felt thick and stifling. I had a secret that even my husband didn't know yet. I was 14 weeks pregnant. I wasn't hiding it out of selfishness. I was hiding it out of fear. Fear that Catherine would use this pregnancy as an all-access pass to control my life, forcing me to quit my job, demanding I move into her Greenwich estate to eat, sleep, and breathe according to her schedule. And I feared something even more painful. If I shared this joyous news and Blake responded with cold indifference, it would carve a deep wound in my heart. The chill in a marriage doesn't arrive in one sudden blizzard. It creeps in through small changes like the shifting of seasons. Blake had started coming home later. Our dinners together became rare. His phone was always placed face down on the marble counter. If a call came in, he would step out onto the terrace to speak in hushed tones, returning with the excuse that it was a client. One day he came home, and his suit carried the distinct lingering scent of an unfamiliar heavy women's perfume. I asked, half joking, "Late meeting, or did you take up a side gig as a fragrance model?" He answered casually, "Female clients wear a lot of perfume. You know how it is." It sounded plausible, but the slight hesitation in his eyes made my stomach knot. Right around our anniversary, there was a massive coordination issue with our supply chain. I was sprinting between the warehouse floor and the operations hub, a tension headache pounding behind my eyes. My assistant Mia handed me a bottle of warm water and whispered, Take a breath, Riley. Don't work yourself into the ground. I nodded. Health is everything but in my husband's family. I wasn't allowed to look weak. That evening, I left work early and cooked a full, elaborate dinner: seared scallops, roasted asparagus, and truffle risotto. I tried to warm up our sprawling apartment with the smell of a home-cooked meal. Blake got home close to 9 p.m. He looked at the dining table and just muttered, "Oh." He ate a few obligatory bites, his eyes glued to his phone screen as if the device was his actual dinner date. Right then, the private elevator chimed. Catherine walked in. The moment she set her Birkin bag down, she glared at me. What kind of wife lets the house feel this dead a man works all day? He should come home to warmth. She then turned to Blake with a lecturing tone. Blake, you can be busy. You can be... But your wife needs to know how to manage a home. I stood beside him, my hands still damp from washing dishes, and could only reply, "Yes, Catherine." In my heart, I knew her advice sounded wise to an outsider, but it was actually a leash meant to yank me back into my designated place. Catherine scanned the room and stopped at the kitchen island, where I had accidentally left a bottle of prenatal vitamins transferred into a generic supplement bottle. She picked it up, squinted at the label, and asked, "What are you taking?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I offered a thin smile. "Just some vitamins so I don't get fatigued." She put it down without pressing further, but her eyes told me everything. She was taking mental notes. That night our apartment was brightly lit, but I felt like I was standing completely alone in the massive kitchen. I placed a hand over my stomach, pressing gently, as if afraid a single deep breath might shatter everything. People say, if a husband and wife share one heart, they can drain the ocean. But before I even had a chance to try, my own heart had already dried up. The next morning, I woke up while the Manhattan skyline was still wrapped in a pre-dawn haze. I made a cup of hot water with lemon, forced down a piece of dry toast to settle my morning sickness, and headed to the office early. While most people were still picking out their outfits, I was already trying to find a solution for a shipping container stuck at the port. The moment I walked into the lobby, my phone rang. The warehouse manager reported a critical temperature fluctuation in cold storage unit 3. If it wasn't fixed immediately, millions of dollars of frozen goods would be ruined. I sprinted to the ops floor, calling the technicians, the facility managers, and the logistics team. Before I could even catch my breath, dispatch called. A major delivery truck had flipped on the Cross Bronx Expressway. If we missed our delivery windows, the supermarket chains would hit us with brutal contract penalties. I stood in front of the multi-monitor display. My fingers flew across the keyboard. My mouth barked clear, concise instructions. Mia shadowed me, handing me clipboards, sliding a cup of water onto my desk. She looked at me and joked, "You're the kind of person who tries to carry the weight of the world alone, Riley. Keep this up and your spine is going to snap." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Around 10:30 a.m., Blake strolled onto the ops floor. In front of the employees, he played the perfect CEO, shaking hands, greeting people, offering charismatic words of encouragement. But when his eyes briefly met mine, his gaze was as cold as the steel doors of the freezer units. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't love. It was just complete apathy. I proactively gave him a brief sit-rep on the cold storage and the truck accident. He listened, nodded, and said lightly, "Good thing you can handle it. I'm packed with client meetings today." That one sentence made me feel like a subordinate giving a status report, not a wife sharing the heavy burden of a joint enterprise. Words are free, but some words are so cheap they hurt. By noon, I needed to access the system to approve an emergency budget adjustment for the warehouse repairs, but the system flashed an error: insufficient privileges. Usually, my position had the authority to greenlight operational expenses up to a very high threshold. I assumed it was an IT glitch and called the help desk. After a moment of hesitation, the IT guy said, "Ms. Lawson, your permissions were modified this morning. Direct request from the CEO. I'm just following orders." I froze, an order that was never communicated to me. I didn't lose my temper. I simply asked IT to send me an email confirming the permission change, so there was a paper trail. Mia looked at me worried. "Riley, why did your access get pulled?" I didn't answer immediately. I just whispered, "Everything needs to be in black and white." Saying it out loud, I realized I was teaching myself how to survive with a cold, calculating mind. During lunch, Mia pulled me into the emergency stairwell. She whispered, "Riley, I went up to the executive suite for some files earlier. I heard Blake talking to his new secretary. He told her, "Keep this entirely off the books. Make sure no one sees the process." It freaked me out. I asked, "What's the new secretary's name?" "Julia Sands. She seems super quiet, speaks really softly." I nodded, keeping my face passive. In this world, you can know a person's face, but never their heart. A person's true nature isn't in the softness of their voice, but in what they hide behind their back. That afternoon, I had to drive out to our New Jersey facility. Traffic was a nightmare. Cars crammed together, horns blaring. I stared at the gridlock and suddenly felt like I was looking at my own life. Everyone trying to move forward, but always blocked by a nameless, suffocating congestion. Back at the office late in the afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number asking for my schedule for the week. I opened it. It was Julia Sands. Very polite. "Excuse me, Ms. Lawson. I'd like to request your itinerary so I can align it with Mr. Sterling's schedule." It sounded reasonable, but my internal alarms blared. My schedule had always been managed by me and Mia. No one from the executive suite had ever requested it like this. I replied with standard corporate detachment, "Please send a formal request via email to Mia. We will respond accordingly." I refuse to engage in private texts. In an office, one misinterpreted text can become a weapon. When I got home, the apartment was immaculate, but the air felt suffocating. Blake came home earlier than usual, but not to eat with me. He went straight to his study, locked the door, and got on a call. I walked past and caught fragments. Documents, expenses, wire the money immediately. His voice was low but frantic, as if terrified of being overheard. I stood in the kitchen reheating soup. My stomach was churning like boiling water. Blake stepped out for a glass of water, saw me, and asked indifferently, "How was the office today?" "Secure," I said, staring right at him. "Secure on my own terms." He paused, then walked back into his study, acting as if my answer had nothing to do with him. Right then, my mother-in-law called. She skipped the pleasantries. "Riley, Blake is under a lot of stress. Don't give him a headache. A smart woman knows when to take a step back so her husband respects her." I gave my standard, "Yes, Catherine," but inside I thought, if I keep stepping back, when do my shoulders hit the wall? I looked at my hands, the hands that signed off on multi-million-dollar supply chain logistics by day, forced to learn submission by night to appease someone else's ego. I never wanted to be a paranoid wife, but the fragments of today, the revoked system access, the secretive phone calls, the secretary probing for my schedule felt like grains of sand in my eye, small but impossible to ignore. I sat down, placed both hands over my womb, and quickly pulled them away, as if afraid I'd betray my own secret. When a man starts hiding things, it means he's paving an exit route for himself, leaving his wife alone in a maze of questions. Our anniversary fell on a crisp New York morning, but the wind rattling the high-rise windows sounded mournful. I woke up earlier than usual, not out of excitement, but because the 14-week morning sickness hit hard. I managed a few bites of plain oatmeal and some ginger tea to settle my stomach. Blake walked out of the dressing room in a crisp Tom Ford shirt. He checked his Rolex while buttoning his cuffs and said, "I'm heading out. Back-to-back meetings today." I stood by the kitchen island and asked quietly, "Are you coming home for dinner?" He didn't look up. We'll see. Two incredibly light words that landed like lead weights in my chest. I changed into my work clothes, packing some dry crackers just in case the nausea returned. Mia met me at the elevator bank at work. Seeing how pale I was, she immediately handed me a thermos of homemade ginger broth. "Sip this, Riley. It'll help." Small acts of kindness like this sometimes make you want to cry, simply because they arrive exactly when you need them most. The moment I entered the ops floor, I was buried in approvals replacement inventory paperwork, the NJ facility demanding more trucks, the freezer unit needing a total sensor overhaul. I tackled them one by one, my brain strung tight as piano wire. Around 10:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Blake. "Happy anniversary. Jammed with board meetings, but I didn't forget. I ordered you something high-end and nutritious. Eat it so you stay healthy." I read it 3 times. In 4 years, he rarely bothered with small romantic gestures. I wasn't obsessed with gifts, but this sudden shower of attention felt like a sunny sky abruptly turning black with storm clouds. When something is too good to be true, it usually is. Before I could text back, reception called. "Ms. Lawson, there's a delivery for you." I went down to the lobby and saw Julia Sands standing near the front desk holding a stack of files. She smiled softly. "Ms. Lawson, are you picking up your delivery?" I gave a curt nod. A courier handed me a heavy, high-end insulated container from a 3-Michelin-star restaurant. The label on the pristine paper bag was clear, gold-leaf lobster bisque. Just reading the words made my stomach heave. For a pregnant woman suffering from nausea, the thought of rich, heavy seafood was enough to make my throat burn. I carried the container to my office and set it on my desk, trying to act normal. Mia saw it, and her eyes lit up. "Wow, Mr. Sterling is so thoughtful." I gave a bitter smile. "Yeah, maybe." I popped the lid off just a fraction. Thick steam rolled out. The smell of heavy cream, concentrated lobster stock, and truffle oil hit me like a physical punch. Before I could even look at it, my eyes watered and my throat seized. I slammed the lid back on and sprinted to the executive washroom. I gripped the marble sink, retching until my knees shook. Tears streamed down my face, not from physical pain, but from a crushing sense of helplessness. I felt like a puppet on strings, forced to smile while choking. I washed my face, dried it, and took a deep breath. In the mirror, I looked like a ghost. I tried to calm down. A straight tree doesn't fear the storm, but even a straight tree feels the cold when the wind is toxic. Mia asked, concerned. "Acid reflux." I nodded slowly. "I'm just really sensitive to smells today." She opened her mouth to ask more, but I shook my head. I wasn't ready for anyone to know about the pregnancy, especially if the gossip trickled back to my in-laws with a spin on it. I looked at the thermal container on my desk. If I threw it away, someone would see, and I'd be labeled a spoiled, ungrateful executive wife. If I put it in the communal fridge, the smell would seep out, and I'd have to explain why I wasn't eating my husband's expensive gift. I chose the safest route. I locked it inside my personal filing cabinet. Sometimes silence is the only way to dodge a bullet, especially when you don't know who is pulling the trigger. Around 11 a.m., Blake called. His tone was flat. "Did you eat?" "Not yet," I said. "The smell is a bit too rich for me today." He paused, then said, "Eat a little. Don't let people see it, and start whispering that the CEO's wife is frail and unappreciative." Hearing that broke my heart. He cared more about optics than my physical comfort. Classic Sterling family protocol. I hung up and returned to my paperwork, but a tiny thorn had lodged in my mind. Not because the soup was expensive, but because of the specific way he chose our anniversary to care for me and his obsession with what people would say. I was just a PR asset to him. By late morning, I unlocked my cabinet to grab a file and set the thermal container on my desk temporarily. It sat there like an unopened gift, but also like an unanswered threat. At exactly 11:15 a.m., Mia cracked my office door open, her face rigid. She whispered, "Riley, your mother-in-law is stepping off the elevator." My hand froze. In a corporate office, some rumors blow in like a gentle breeze, but are enough to make the hair on your arms stand up. Before I could ask anything, the sharp, authoritative click-clack of expensive heels echoed down the hallway. Catherine appeared exactly the way she always did, unannounced, uninvited, unapologetic. She wore a tailored Chanel tweed suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, a Hermes Kelly bag on her arm. Her eyes swept the ops floor. She didn't look for signage or ask for directions. She walked through as if her name was on the building. Julia Sands trailed half a step behind her, hugging a stack of folders. The new secretary looked at me with a polite, vacant smile. "Ms. Lawson, Mrs. Sterling is here to see you." I stood up, keeping my voice level. "Good morning, Catherine. What brings you to the office?" She didn't answer right away. She walked straight in, her eyes locking onto my desk, right where the thermal container sat. Bad luck never comes alone, the saying goes. My only mistake was leaving it out for 2 minutes. She offered a sneering smile. "Oh, look at this. The CEO has 100 fires to put out, yet he still makes time to order gourmet food for his wife. Must be nice to be you." Hearing her tone, my mouth went dry. I answered softly, "Yes, Blake ordered it." She reached out and tapped the lid as if inspecting evidence. "Have you eaten it?" I kept it brief. "I'm a bit sensitive to the smell today, so I'm saving it for later." She cut me off, her tone sharp but cultured, the kind of insult delivered at a country club volume. Sensitive to this, sensitive to that, women today are too delicate. People will look at you and think our family doesn't know how to take care of our daughter-in-law, letting you look so sickly. Shina Aukatsanai. I felt eyes on me from the glass walls of my office. Employees were intentionally walking slower. Anything involving the CEO's mother was headline news. I maintained my professional smile. I'm perfectly fine, Catherine. Don't worry about me. Catherine dropped her Kelly bag onto the guest chair, then walked around my desk, pulled out my ergonomic chair and sat in it. The audacity was breathtaking. She gestured with her chin. Open it and eat it right now. How dare you waste such expensive, nutritious food? Your husband treats you like a queen, and you act like a spoiled child. I stood beside her, my hands balled into fists behind my back. I knew if I flat out refused, she would declare me a defiant, disrespectful brat. If I stayed silent, she would escalate. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Catherine, I genuinely cannot stomach anything this rich right now. Please, she interrupted. Please, what are you afraid of getting fat? Or are you starving yourself just to make my son look bad? My face flushed hot. I realized she wasn't here about food. She was here to publicly humiliate me and assert dominance. I don't mean that at all, Catherine. She stared at me, then suddenly grabbed the container and popped the lid. The steam hit the Air Lobster cream truffle. My stomach flipped violently. I turned my head away. She let out a dry laugh. Look at you, so weak. When I was pregnant with Blake, I was still hosting galas and managing the estate. No coddling. She picked up the plastic spoon, scooped up the bisque, and shoved it toward my mouth. Eat. I am sitting right here until you do. At that moment, I knew this was subjugation. I looked at the spoon, looked at her cold eyes, and caught a glimpse of Mia standing outside the glass, her eyes wide with panic. I couldn't vomit here. I couldn't become the office laughingstock. I gently pushed her wrist down. My voice was low but absolute. Catherine, I am asking you to leave it. I cannot eat it. She slammed the spoon down the plastic, cracking against the desk. What a shame. A thoughtful husband, an ungrateful wife. If I let this continue, the narrative would be set. So I took the most passive-aggressive route available. With the perfectly polite tone of a subservient daughter-in-law, I said, Well, then you should have it, Catherine, so it doesn't go to waste. It's highly nutritious after all. Oi, tatan. Catherine froze for a second. Then, as if she had just won a chess match, she pulled the container toward herself. Now this is better. Fine food shouldn't be wasted by those who don't appreciate it. And she actually ate it sitting in my chair at my desk in the middle of my operations floor. Between bites, she delivered a masterclass in psychological warfare, just loud enough for the cubicles outside to hear. If only Blake had married someone who knew how to run a household, his life would be so much easier. It's never good when a woman gets caught up in the corporate nights. It makes the man look small. We are a prominent family. A daughter-in-law needs to know how to protect her husband's image. I stood beside her like a shadow. I couldn't leave because walking away would be insubordinate. I couldn't argue because arguing was hysterical. I just watched the clock, watched my monitors, and regulated my breathing. Mia quietly slipped in, placed a glass of iced water on the desk for Catherine, and vanished like a ghost. Catherine nearly finished the bisque, dabbed her mouth with a napkin, stood up and grabbed her bag. Before walking out, she delivered her final sermon. Remember, a woman's true strength is her ability to endure. Bite your tongue and good things will follow. Keep acting stubborn and the world will laugh at you. With that, she spun on her heel and marched out. Julia Sands followed her, still smiling gently, but her eyes flicked toward the empty soup container, as if confirming a target had been neutralized. The office door clicked shut. For 10 seconds, absolute silence reigned on the ops floor. Mia looked at me, wanted to speak, but stopped. I reached down and picked up the container. My hands were shaking slightly. I wasn't crying. I just felt like something deep inside my chest had been violently ripped out. Not the soup, my dignity. I pulled my chair back. No, wait. Someone else just sat in it to teach me a lesson. I sat down, clicked my mouse, and brought the logistics spreadsheet back up. The cursor blinked. The supply chain doesn't stop for anyone's bruised ego. But right then, a very clear thought wrote itself into my mind. Sometimes a gift isn't given out of love. It's given to force you into submission. I had barely settled into my chair, my eyes still scanning the shipping manifests, when a terrifying sound erupted from the hallway. Rapid, frantic footsteps, not the usual corporate hustle, but a panicked sprint. Then a heavy thud against the drywall. I jolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mia was the first to react, yanking the office door open, her face drained of all color, her lips trembling. "Riley, it's Blake's mother." Instinct took over. I sprinted into the corridor. The usually pristine, minimalist hallway had turned into a scene of absolute chaos. Catherine was slumped against the wall. One hand clutched her stomach, the other braced against the carpeted floor. Her entire body was convulsing in violent tremors, as if something was actively tearing her apart from the inside. Sweat poured down her forehead, ruining her immaculate blowout. The horrific sound of violent, agonizing retching echoed off the glass walls. An HR coordinator nearby was frantically waving paper towels, too terrified to touch her. A security guard came sprinting down the hall, shouting into his radio. I looked at the floor. A trail of thick golden-yellow lobster bisque was splattered across the carpet. The rich smell of seafood now mixed with a sharp, acidic stench of vomit. It was nauseating. Someone nearby shrieked, "Oh my God, she's been poisoned!" Another voice whispered, low but loud enough to hear, "Didn't she just eat the food from Ms. Lawson's office?" Hearing that sentence felt like ice water in my veins. One sentence. That's all it took to plant the seed of murder. Catherine convulsed again, then suddenly snapped her head up and locked eyes with me. Her gaze was no longer the arrogant glare of a wealthy matriarch. It was the terrified feral look of someone in unimaginable agony, a mix of primal fear and pure rage. She reached out with a trembling claw-like hand and gripped the fabric of my slacks. Her manicured nails dug so hard I felt them pinch my skin. Her voice was shredded gravelly. "Poison!" That word dropped into the hallway like a live grenade. The entire floor froze. People covered their mouths. Some physically stepped back, distancing themselves from the blast radius. I stood paralyzed for a fraction of a second, then immediately dropped to my knees, grabbing her wrist so she wouldn't collapse entirely, and crack her skull on the floor. I didn't have time to process the shock, because right in front of me, an elderly woman was dying. I whipped my head toward the security guard. "Call 911 right now. Get the building's EMTs up here. Code blue." I turned to Mia. "Mia, water bottle and a cold, damp towel. Move." Mia bolted. I helped Catherine lean against the wall, trying to get her to breathe. She kept retching. With every spasm, her grip on my pants tightened. It was as if she wanted to drag me into hell with her. People say don't kick someone when they're down. At that moment, I just wanted to keep her breathing, regardless of how she had treated me. But simultaneously, my ears picked up the murmurs of the crowd. Maybe the daughter-in-law spiked it. She walked out of her office and boom! Look at her. I knew that if I panicked or acted defensive, I would look guilty. I had to remain hyper-logical. I took a deep breath and barked at the crowd. "Everyone step back. Give her oxygen. If you have a mask, put it on and clear the corridor." My authoritative tone snapped a few people out of their shock. They backed away, but their eyes remained fixed on me. I was officially the prime suspect. Minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the Manhattan air. Paramedics charged off the elevator with a gurney and trauma kits. They began firing questions. Medical history. What did she ingest? Seafood allergies. Before I could answer, Catherine seized again, her face going stark white as she vomited a foamy liquid. The medics immediately slapped an oxygen mask on her and started checking her vitals. One of the EMTs looked at the mess on the floor and asked sharply, "Who gave her this?" "She ate it 10 minutes ago in my office," I said, keeping my voice utterly clinical. I didn't say who ordered it. I didn't say I was forced. I knew that in a crisis, every word is recorded, speak only facts. Mia returned with a towel. She crouched next to me and whispered, her voice shaking, "Riley, you need to document the timeline. When she arrived, when she ate, when she dropped. We need a record." I looked at Mia. In the middle of this nightmare, her corporate instincts pulled me back from the edge. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app. My thumbs were shaking, but I typed furiously, "Let's." 2 a.m. Catherine enters ops floor. 11:13 a.m. Catherine leaves my office. 11:15 a.m. Commotion in hallway. Collapse. 11:17 a.m. 911 called. 11:22 a.m. Paramedics arrive. I wasn't being cold. I was building a shield. Because if this story got twisted even slightly, my life was over. The paramedics loaded Catherine onto the gurney. She was still gripping my pant leg, refusing to let go. The lead EMT looked at me. "Family needs to ride in the bus." I hesitated. If I went, I'd be trapped in a confined space as the prime suspect. If I stayed, I'd be the heartless, murderous daughter-in-law. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. I remembered Catherine's words. A woman's true strength is her ability to endure. But this wasn't about endurance. It was about the brutal calculus of survival. I turned to Mia. "Stay here. Lock my office. Lock the filing cabinets. Do not let anyone touch my desk or the trash cans. If anyone asks, I'm with the ambulance." Mia nodded, her eyes rimmed with red. I walked alongside the gurney toward the freight elevator. As the doors closed, I could feel the weight of 50 stairs burning into my back. The back of the ambulance smelled intensely of rubbing alcohol and sterile plastic. Catherine lay thrashing weakly under the oxygen mask. The paramedic sitting across from me was working frantically. "Does she have pre-existing conditions? Hypertension, diabetes, shellfish allergy?" I swallowed hard. "No known conditions that I'm aware of. She complains of acid reflux sometimes." "I've never heard of a shellfish allergy." The paramedic nodded, his face grim. "She's tachycardic. BP is bottoming out. Severe dehydration from the vomiting. I'm calling a trauma alert." Hearing her blood pressure was crashing, my pulse skyrocketed. Despite everything, I didn't want her dead. I pulled out my phone and dialed Blake. Once, twice. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was smooth, relaxed, the voice of a man sitting in a climate-controlled boardroom. "What's going on?" I forced my voice into an emotionless operational cadence. "Blake, Catherine is in an ambulance. She ate the bisque you sent to my office. She collapsed in the hallway. We are en route to Mount Sinai." Dead silence. Then he exploded. "You're trying to kill my mother." I stopped breathing. His reaction wasn't shock. It wasn't, "Oh my God, is she okay?" It was an immediate, calculated accusation. It was the reaction of a man who already knew something lethal was inside that highly nutritious gift. He immediately lowered his voice, pivoting clumsily. "I mean, what if she's allergic? Why the hell would you feed her random food?" I stared at my shaking hands. I didn't feed it to her. She bullied me into letting her eat it. I asked quietly, "Where are you? Can you get to the hospital?" "I'm in the middle of a board meeting," he snapped. "You deal with her. We'll talk later." Before I could process that, he dropped his voice into a vicious, commanding whisper. "And you're pregnant. Don't go running your mouth to the cops. Don't make a scene. Do you understand me?" Hearing the word pregnant, it felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. I had never told him. I hid it so well that even Mia only suspected it. Yet he knew. And he said it with chilling casualness. I dug my fingernails into my palms to stay grounded. Over the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor, I replied with a dead flat tone, "What are you talking about? I never told you that." He paused, realizing he had slipped. "I just know. Don't ask questions about the soup. Don't mention it to anyone. Remember that." Click. I sat frozen. My ears were ringing. An old quote echoed in my mind. "The guilty mind betrays itself. If he was innocent, why demand a cover-up about the soup?" If this was just food poisoning, why did he react like he knew the outcome? I opened the Notes app and typed 11:28 a.m. Phone call with Blake. He accused me of hurting his mother. He knew about the pregnancy, ordered me to stay quiet about the soup. I documented it like an incident report. My life no longer afforded me the luxury of relying on memory. The ambulance skidded into the ER bay at Mount Sinai. The neon lights reflected off the wet pavement. Doctors and nurses swarmed the gurney. I stood off to the side, listening to the medical jargon, terrified but grateful for their clinical efficiency. Catherine was wheeled into the trauma bay. I stood in the corridor, my hands freezing cold. An attending physician walked out. "Are you family to daughter-in-law?" His words were clipped and sharp. The patient is presenting with acute toxicity, severe muscle spasms, and unusual internal hemorrhaging. This is not standard food poisoning. We are running tox screens and per protocol notifying the NYPD because we suspect a synthetic chemical agent. My vision blurred for a second. I didn't ask what agent because I was terrified of the answer. Is she going to live? We're stabilizing her, but it's touch and go. I need you to cooperate fully regarding the timeline and exactly what she ingested. I nodded. Stay calm. Pressure turns coal into diamonds, but it also grinds weak stones to dust. I couldn't afford to break. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my back pressed against the cold wall. I placed a hand over my stomach, not out of fear of discovery, but out of a desperate need to protect. If Blake was right, if that soup was spiked, it was never meant for his mother. It was meant for me. I looked at the call log on my phone. The line had been drawn. From this moment on, I wasn't a wife trying to keep the peace. I was a woman fighting for her life, her sanity, and her unborn child, armed with timestamps and an ironclad paper trail. The ER waiting room smelled of industrial bleach latex and the quiet desperation of people waiting for bad news. I sat completely rigid, my hands numb. My phone buzzed incessantly. Unknown numbers, corporate extensions, family group chats. I didn't answer a single one. One misplaced word could be twisted into a confession. 30 minutes later, the attending doctor emerged and pulled me into a quiet alcove. He pointed to a tablet showing lab results. The toxicity levels confirmed severe poisoning. The chemical agent triggered violent hemorrhaging. Hospital protocol mandates we loop in the NYPD. A detective is already on the way. My ears rang. I didn't ask for specifics. I just needed to know the immediate reality. Is she stable? She's critical but guarded in the ICU. We're monitoring her closely. Indeed. I nodded. A heavy weight settled in my chest. Keeping the peace was my mantra as a daughter-in-law, but in a hospital, peace was no longer an option. We were now operating on legal protocols. As I stepped back into the main corridor, Blake burst through the ER sliding doors. His suit was still perfectly tailored, his hair flawlessly styled. That pristine appearance made my blood run cold. It was the look of a man who had prepared his face for a war. Serena was right behind him, her eyes puffy and red, but her mouth worked faster than her tears. "Oh my God, Riley, how could this happen?" she wailed. Blake bypassed her and marched straight up to me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He glared at me like an interrogator. "What did my mother eat?" I answered clinically, stating only facts. "She ate the lobster bisque you had delivered to my office this morning." Blake's eyes darkened. He clenched his jaw, then turned to Serena as if securing his witness. "See, I told you. If you let people eat random garbage, who takes the blame?" The phrase, "let people eat," suffocated me. I wasn't a toddler to be scolded, but I kept my voice dead level. "Blake, I didn't feed it to her. She ate it on her own volition. There were witnesses on the floor." Serena immediately jumped in, playing the weeping victim. "Riley, you're just trying to wash your hands of this. Mom ate in your office from your food container and now she's in a coma. You claiming there are witnesses makes it sound like you're plotting a cover-up." I stared at Serena. I knew her game. She didn't need to yell. She just needed to assassinate my character. I spoke slowly, placing every word carefully. "Serena, do not make baseless accusations. This is a hospital. People operate on medical records here, not feelings." Blake stepped closer, lowering his voice into a menacing growl. "Don't use that corporate HR tone with me. You received the food, you kept it. You're involved. You're involved." He was actively stripping away my status as his wife to stick a target on my back. I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time, I felt zero affection for the man standing in front of me. "I am currently the family member acting as the emergency contact. I will cooperate fully with the authorities, but do not project your liabilities onto me." Blake flinched, unaccustomed to me standing my ground. Serena dramatically gasped, gearing up for a full meltdown to draw an audience. Just then a nurse approached. "Family for Catherine Sterling. The detective needs a word." We were led into a small consultation room. A man in a cheap suit, but with the sharp posture of a veteran cop, stood waiting. He held up a badge. "Detective Arthur Walsh, NYPD. I need to establish a timeline chain of custody for the food and who ingested what." His voice wasn't aggressive, but it carried the weight of the law. I reminded myself honesty is the best policy, but it must be delivered with chronological precision. Walsh looked at us. "Who ordered the food?" Blake answered instantly. His voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "I ordered it, but I sent it to my wife. She was the one who gave it to my mother." I felt a chill run down my spine. She was the one. He was throwing me to the wolves with absolute ease. I didn't argue. I waited my turn, then spoke with crystal clarity. "Detective, I want to outline the exact timeline. I received the container in the lobby. I did not eat it because I had morning sickness. At roughly 11 a.m., my mother-in-law entered my office, saw the container, and pressured me to eat it. I refused. She took it and consumed it herself, sitting at my desk. She then left the office and collapsed in the hallway shortly after. I called 911 and rode with the ambulance." Walsh scrutinized me. "When you say she pressured, you were their witnesses. My assistant Mia and several employees outside the glass walls." Blake let out a scoff. "Her assistant? Of course her lackey will lie for her." I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes on the detective. "The office has CCTV in the corridors and elevators. A subpoena will secure the footage. I am only stating what can be verified." Walsh nodded, taking notes. He asked a few more questions about Catherine's health and the immediate aftermath. I answered concisely. I knew the rule: the more you speak, the more surface area you give them to attack. Serena, dabbing her eyes with the tissue, interjected, "Detective, my sister-in-law is the VP of operations. She knows all about protocols and loopholes. I'm terrified she knows how to cover her tracks." I finally turned to Serena. I didn't smile. "Serena, think carefully before you speak. You are actively defaming me to a police officer. If you have evidence, produce it. If not, stop talking." Serena shrank back, but Blake stepped in. "Defaming you. My mother is lying on a slab." My eyes stung. I was terrified for Catherine too, despite everything. But in his mouth, I was the villain. I turned back to Walsh. "Detective, I am fully prepared to cooperate. Please document my statement and the timeline. I only ask that you rely on verifiable evidence." Walsh closed his notepad. "We follow the evidence, ma'am. No conclusions are being drawn here." The interrogation ended when a nurse announced Catherine was out of the woods, but heavily sedated in the ICU. We stood outside the glass viewing window. Catherine lay hooked up to a ventilator IV line, spiderwebbing across her arms. I thought my heart would soften, but then her eyelids fluttered open. She saw me through the glass. Her gaze was pure venom. She weakly raised a trembling finger pointed dead at me and mouthed a single word to Blake. Blake leaned down to the intercom. "Mom, what are you saying?" Catherine's raspy voice barely carried through the speaker, but it was as heavy as a tombstone. "She poisoned me." I realized then that you don't need a weapon to destroy someone. A frail, dying woman pointing a finger from a hospital bed was enough to make the world believe I was a monster. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't beg for my innocence. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and looked at Detective Walsh, who had just walked up behind us. "Detective, I want to reiterate my request for a formal subpoena of my office CCTV footage immediately. I want the truth handled by the book." I dropped my phone back into my purse and stood tall. My reputation was being dragged through the mud of Mount Sinai, but I knew if I collapsed in tears, I would fall right into the trap they were setting. The next morning, the heat wave broke, leaving a stifling, humid blanket over the city. I woke up at dawn, brewed ginger tea, and forced it down. I barely slept, haunted not by the hospital monitors, but by how easily people can execute you with a single sentence. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my lips pale. One misstep, I told myself, and they will bury you. I arrived at the corporate headquarters exactly on time, not a minute late. If I was late, they would say I was plotting. As I stepped off the elevator, the atmosphere was suffocating. People averted their eyes. Keyboards clattered aggressively as staff pretended to be engrossed in their work. The rumor mill was dining out on the CEO's poisoned mother and the murderous wife. Mia was waiting by my door with hot water. She looked exhausted. She leaned in and whispered, "Riley, someone accessed your office at the crack of dawn." I didn't flinch. "How do you know?" Mia pulled up a screenshot on her phone. It was the electronic keycard log for our floor. At 7:41 a.m., a temporary admin card was swiped at your door. "It's the floater card HR gave to Julia Sands when she started," Mia whispered. "I got here early to prep files. Your door was unlocked, and I saw a crumpled pharmacy receipt in your trash can. I didn't touch it. I just took a picture." I nodded. I didn't immediately rip open my desk drawers. People who set traps wait for you to panic the moment you touch the planted evidence. Your fingerprints are on it, and you've signed your own death warrant. I sat down and logged into my PC. Meanwhile, Mia casually pulled up the floor's printer logs. She pointed to a line item. At 7:58 a.m., Julia Sands' account printed a file named pharmacy_receipt.pdf. I looked at Mia. Incredible work. Now we don't touch anything. Call Ben, my lawyer, then call Detective Walsh. We do this by the book. Mia fired off the emails attaching the access logs and printer histories. I called Detective Walsh. "Detective, I suspect fabricated evidence has been planted in my office. I have keycard and printer logs. I need NYPD crime scene to document this before I touch my desk." Walsh's tone shifted from skeptical to alert. "Do not touch the desk, Ms. Lawson. We're on our way," I told Mia. "Go get the head of the building security and the VP of HR. Bring them here. We need impartial witnesses." 30 minutes later, my office looked like a crime scene. Detective Walsh, an evidence tech, the head of security, and the VP of HR stood around my desk. My lawyer, Ben Sullivan, stood behind me, his briefcase resting on a chair. No drama, just clinical procedural execution. "Which drawer?" Walsh asked. "The bottom right," I said. "I haven't opened it since yesterday. I request it be opened and documented." The evidence tech snapped photos. The head of security confirmed the keycard swipe on his tablet. Walsh pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves and slid the drawer open. Tucked under a stack of logistics manifests was a small plastic baggie containing an unmarked blister pack of pills and a crumpled receipt from a shady pharmacy in Queens. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to build a narrative that I bought black market drugs. If Serena were here, she'd be screaming, "Look, she bought the poison." I looked at Walsh calmly. "For the record, I have never seen these items. I have printer logs and door logs showing Julia Sands accessed this room and printed a fake receipt at 7:41 a.m. Ben handed the printouts to Walsh. Chain of custody and digital forensics detective. The CEO's secretary planted this. Just then, my office door swung open. Julia Sands walked in, maintaining her quiet demeanor, but her eyes went wide with panic when she saw the NYPD. Blake was right behind her. Seeing the cops, his jaw dropped, but he quickly reassembled his CEO mask. "What is the meaning of this?" I didn't call him Blake. I stood up. "Someone planted narcotics and a forged receipt in my desk. I invited the authorities to document it." Blake glared at me. "Are you insane? You're bringing cops into corporate headquarters." Walsh held up the baggie with tweezers. "Mr. Sterling, your secretary's keycard accessed this room right before this was printed from her account. Care to explain?" Julia Sands visibly shook. I was just grabbing a file Mr. Sterling asked for. I didn't print anything." Ben stepped forward. "The IT logs say otherwise, Miss Sands." Blake tried to step in front of her. "It's an IT error. Someone spoofed her account. Don't jump to conclusions." Walsh's voice cut through the room like a knife. "We don't jump to conclusions, sir. We follow digital footprints. I'll be confiscating these hard drives." Blake turned his fury on me. "Riley, I told you to keep family matters in-house. You are destroying us." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am protecting myself by not accusing anyone and by ensuring no one can falsely accuse me. Whoever chose to play dirty will have to deal with the consequences." The evidence was bagged. The reports were signed. When the room finally cleared, Blake lingered by the door. He leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "If you do this, don't blame me for what happens next." I locked my computer screen. "Don't threaten me, Blake. I only operate on signed affidavits." 3 days after the planted evidence debacle, I forced myself into an ironclad routine. By day, I ran the supply chain. By night, I audited the company. I couldn't just sit back and dodge bullets. I needed to know where the ammo was coming from. And in corporate America, the truth is always in the ledger. I logged into the corporate expense system. Usually I only approved logistics costs. This time, I pulled up the external relations and client entertainment budgets, the CEO's discretionary slush fund. I didn't hack anything. I used my legitimate VP credentials, leaving a clean audit trail. I asked Mia to export 6 months of vague expenses, vendor support, client accommodations, strategic consulting. Within an hour, a pattern emerged. One vendor kept popping up: Apex Solutions, LLC. Heartland Provisions was a food distributor. Why was Apex Solutions billing us for high-end residential furniture and long-term lease agreements? I dug into the invoices. There was a recurring monthly charge of $18,500 for corporate housing. The address was a luxury penthouse in Tribeca, not a hotel, a permanent residence. My blood ran cold. Company funds were paying for someone's secret life. I had Mia pull the LLC registration from the state database. The registered agent for Apex Solutions was Rick Harrington. I stared at the screen. Rick Harrington was Blake's personal fixer, the guy who handled his dirty work. He was the guy the security guard had seen on the basement CCTV sneaking out of the building with a black trash bag on the morning Catherine was poisoned. I saved every PDF. I built a master spreadsheet tracking the PO numbers, the approvals all signed by Blake, and the bank routing numbers. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Evidence must be clean. That afternoon, I got an email from Julia Sands. Subject Q3, Expense Audit Coordination. She was politely asking what accounts I was looking into and offering to assist. It was a fishing expedition. I replied officially, CCing legal and accounting, telling her any inquiries required formal departmental requisition forms. I shut her down cold. Late that night, standing by my penthouse window, watching the Manhattan traffic, I realized something. When a family member views you as an obstacle compromising, just gives them a better angle to stab you. I packed the audit files into a sealed binder. The money was talking, and it was about to scream. I chose a Thursday afternoon to meet Hannah Wyatt. I didn't pick a dark dive bar. I chose the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, bright, heavily surveilled, and public. Hannah was Blake's ex-girlfriend, a pharmaceutical distributor who ran in elite, shady circles. She walked in wearing a Burberry trench coat, looking flawlessly arrogant, but her eyes were twitchy. She sat down, ordered a martini, and crossed her legs. Riley, bold of you to call me. If this is about Blake, I'm not playing therapist. I didn't waste time. I'm not here about your past with my husband. I'm here because someone was poisoned with a synthetic chemical. The NYPD is involved, and the paper trail is getting shorter. Hannah scoffed, but her hand tightened around her glass. Are you writing a true crime podcast? What does this have to do with me? I slid my phone across the table screen down, just as a prop. I ran the corporate ledgers. Blake's been funneling corporate funds to Rick Harrington's shell companies. Harrington was caught on CCTV during the poisoning incident. If you aren't involved, great. You just need to tell me, did Harrington or Blake ask you to source an untraceable chemical agent? Hannah's face lost all its color. She looked around the lobby, terrified. Where are you getting this? I run operations. I see everything. I'm handing my files over to the DA. If you know something, you better get in front of it. I leaned in and delivered the final blow. Hannah Blake knows I'm pregnant. He found out before the poisoning. Hannah gasped. She didn't try to hide her shock. She looked at my stomach, her arrogant facade crumbling. He actually... I nodded. That was all it took. Hannah bit her lip, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. Riley, I swear I have nothing to do with him anymore, but he called me. He said your pregnancy was a liability. He needed to clean it up so his shares wouldn't be complicated in a divorce. My heart stopped. I instinctively touched my stomach. Clean it up. The father of my child referred to my baby as a liability to be liquidated. Hannah dug frantically into her Chanel bag. He asked me for something odorless, fast-acting, and abortifacient mixed with a heavy sedative. I told him no, but Harrington called me later demanding access to my black market suppliers. I got scared. I recorded the calls to protect myself. She slammed a black USB drive onto the marble table. Take it, but you have to promise to keep my name out of the press. I didn't touch the drive yet. I pulled a sterile evidence envelope from my bag, wrote the time, date, and location on it, and slid the USB inside. I signed across the seal and made her sign it too. I don't make promises, I said coldly. I submit evidence with a chain of custody. If you want immunity, call a lawyer. I left her sitting there paralyzed by the mess she had helped create. I walked out into the sweltering New York air. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. I was pure, weaponized grief. I took a cab straight to my lawyer's office, handing the sealed envelope directly to Detective Walsh, who met us there. If what's on this drive is true, Ms. Lawson, your husband is looking at attempted murder, corporate fraud, and conspiracy, Walsh said grimly. I handed him my prenatal medical records. I want full protection, and I want to detonate this on my terms. The Emergency Board of Directors meeting was called on a Monday. The agenda, a $12 million expansion project for our Midwest warehouses. Blake had rushed the proposal. Looking at the financials, I knew exactly what it was, a massive cash grab to liquidate corporate assets before the NYPD closed in on him. Mia stood outside the boardroom. I walked in carrying a single slim manila folder. The board members, mostly older, wealthy men, nodded at me. Blake stood at the head of the mahogany table, looking impeccably sharp, projecting total control. He pitched the $12 million expansion flawlessly. This is our chance to dominate the logistics network. We need a vote today to secure the contractors. When he finished, he smiled. Any questions before we vote? I stood up. The room went dead silent. I have a statement, I said clearly, and I want the corporate secretary to record this verbatim in the minutes. Blake's smile vanished. Riley, this is an executive board meeting, not the place for your personal grievances. I ignored him addressing the board. As VP of Operations and a voting shareholder, I am officially flagging this project as a high-risk vehicle for corporate embezzlement. Murmurs erupted. A senior board member frowned. That is a massive accusation, Ms. Lawson. Where is your proof? I opened my folder. I didn't scream. I just read the data. Over the last 6 months, $18,500 a month has been diverted from external relations to lease a luxury Tribeca penthouse for Apex Solutions, LLC, a shell company owned by Rick Harrington, Mr. Sterling's personal associate. Furthermore, this $12 million expansion lists Apex as the primary consulting contractor with a 40% upfront cash disbursement. The board members turned to Blake, their expressions hardening. Blake slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. You're having a mental breakdown because of my mother's health. Your mother was poisoned by a chemical sourced by Rick Harrington, paid for with these exact corporate funds. I fired back, my voice echoing off the glass walls. The NYPD has the financial ledgers, the CCTV footage of Harrington fleeing the building, and audio recordings of you ordering the toxin. Julia Sands, sitting in the corner taking minutes, dropped her pen. She looked like she was going to faint. Shut up, Blake roared, his CEO mask completely shattering. You don't know what you're talking about. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Detective Walsh, flanked by 3 uniformed NYPD officers and federal regulators, walked in. The room froze. Blake Sterling, Walsh said, his voice booming. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate embezzlement, and tampering with evidence. Blake went white. He looked at the board, searching for an ally. Everyone averted their eyes. An officer slapped cuffs on him right in front of the multi-million-dollar projection screen. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back at me, his eyes wild with rage and defeat. I didn't look away. I simply closed my manila folder and sat back down. I didn't need to gloat. The paperwork had done the screaming for me. The fallout was absolute. The company initiated a massive purge. Rick Harrington flipped on Blake to avoid a life sentence. Julia Sands was fired and indicted for planting evidence. The offshore accounts were frozen. Catherine Sterling was eventually discharged from the hospital, a fraction of the woman she used to be. I visited her exactly once at her Greenwich estate to finalize some paperwork. She looked at me, her arrogant fire completely extinguished. He was trying to kill you and the baby, she rasped. I didn't offer sympathy. The truth is out. Take care of your health, Catherine. She looked down. I'm sorry, Riley. I didn't forgive her. Some wounds don't heal with a simple apology, but my dignity was intact. The divorce was swift and brutal. Ben, my lawyer, weaponized the criminal indictments to secure me total control of my assets, full custody, and a massive buyout of Blake's shares. Serena tried to call me once, sobbing about how I destroyed the family. I hung up and blocked her number. Months later, as the New York winter gave way to spring, I went into labor. My daughter was born on a bright, crisp morning. Her first cry was loud and clear, a confirmation that I had protected the most important thing in the world. I named her Haven because after surviving the storm, she would be my peace. I returned to Heartland Provisions not as a subservient wife, but as the chief operating officer. I rebuilt the compliance structures, fired the enablers, and ran the supply chain with lethal efficiency. People think the best revenge is destroying someone publicly with screaming matches and drama, but I learned the truth. The best revenge is surviving, keeping your receipts, and standing tall on a mountain of irrefutable evidence while you build a beautiful life they can never touch.